Resources Committee meeting for Thursday, May 2nd. First, want to introduce one of our new directors. Supervisor Pat Hume is taking the place of Supervisor Kennedy. So we want to welcome Mr. Hume and welcome to our committee and the board.
Great, thank you.
We're recording. And also welcome Sarah Kino from Folsom, who's sitting in for Mike Kozlowski today. Welcome. Right. Robert, do you have anything to?
Yeah, a few housekeeping announcements. Just be sure to unmute your mic before you speak. Green means you are live, red means you are muted. And Chair Villegas is joining us virtually, but he will not be voting as he's participating virtually in the discussion, but he'll be able to join in on the discussion. That's the housekeeping announcements.
Begin with the pledge, and Supervisor Baines, if you help us out with that.
Great. Address the flag, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sorry for the delay here. With a little technical difficulty.
No worries. Chair Lozano, would you like me to do the roll call?
Go ahead and do roll call.
Okay.
Yes.
Directors, when I call your name, please indicate your presence. Director Bullahan?
Here.
Frost? Here. Thank you. Harris?
Here.
Hume?
Here.
Aquino for Kozlowski?
Here.
Peter?
Here.
Vice Chair Baines?
Present.
Vice Chair Lozano?
Here.
Chair Villegas?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Excellent. I think I'm all caught up now. Okay. And next, we're going to entertain public communications. Are there any public communications?
There's no public comment this time.
Okay. And next, the consent calendar. Looking for a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Move to approve. Baines.
And I'll second. Vice Chair Baines with first, and I'll second. All the, oh, go ahead with roll call.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. When I call your name, please indicate your vote. Director Bullahan?
Aye.
Frost? Harris?
Yeah.
Hume?
Abstain.
Abstain. Aquino for Kozlowski?
I guess I'll abstain also.
Okay. Peter? Vice Chair Baines?
Aye.
Vice Chair Lozano?
Aye.
Chair Villegas? Absent. Motion carries.
Okay, next item is item 2, the information item. Green means go. Garrett.
Yeah, Garrett is out sick, so I'll introduce our speaker. So we have Dylan Neely, I believe, got it right? Awesome. From Sac Sewer today to talk a little bit about some of the opportunities that we're exploring to work with them and also other special districts to help us progress with our Green Means Go program. So you all know the Green Means Go program, a massive barrier that we have found to development is backbone infrastructure in our infill areas, in our commercial corridors. Sac Sewer has a direction from their board to investigate what they can be doing to relieve pressure in these areas. And we have Dylan here today to start talking about the opportunities that we're looking for. Want to have a good discussion here about what those opportunities are, how we can be working together. We know that we're going to need a lot more partnership than just us and Sac Sewer. And so I think this is a good kind of a case study discussion for how we can really expand and expand our network to start capturing more special districts and working with them more closely. So Dylan, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, thank you for that. So good afternoon, Chair and Directors. I'm Dylan Mealy, a Principal Engineer with the Sacramento Area Sewer District. And I do see a number of familiar faces that sit on our board. So a lot of this is going to be a refresher, maybe some new information if it's been a little while. But today I'm going to be talking about the Sacramento Area Sewer District, or Sac Sewer for short, and some of our incentive and low income programs. So, let's see here. Okay, so overview. I'm going to go over our background, our service area, because there are a number of folks from, I see different jurisdictions. So some of this information will be new. Our system and our responsibility, and again, our incentive and low income programs. Okay. So up here, I have our service area. It's the entire shaded area, and there's two different colors that I'm going to be stepping through here. The Sac Sewer, we're the second largest sewage utility in California, right behind City of LA. We serve more than 1.6 million people in a 386 square mile service area, including unincorporated Sacramento County, the cities of Citrus Heights, Elk Grove, Folsom, Rancho Cordova, Sacramento, and West Sacramento, and also the communities of Cortland, Locke, and Walnut Grove. Our service area is broken up into two areas. We have a sewage collection and treatment, and then just treatment. The collection is really one of four contributing agencies to treatment. The other three being the cities of Folsom, Sacramento, and West Sacramento. I'm going to get into that a little bit more in a later slide. But the darker shaded area is the area that is collection and treatment. So, and the rest again is treatment. So going back to the darker area that I had just mentioned. So this is just an infographic kind of showing the basic sewer system. So starting in the top left, we have an upper lateral. The upper lateral is what serves homes and businesses, often referred to as a private sewer system. And then from there, going downstream, we have the lower lateral. That's really where Sac Sewer's collection system starts, right at the lower lateral. And when I say starts, that's where our responsibility starts. It's typically, you'll see a clean out often right behind the sidewalk. Sac Sewer owns that clean out as well as everything downstream. So owns as far as we're responsible for maintaining and operating that system. A lot of, and I focus on that because a lot of other collection agencies don't own the lower lateral. They own what's referred to as the main line, which is red, identified as B, again, top left. But we do own the, I'm sorry, not upper lateral, but lower lateral. So once it goes down the, waste goes down the lower lateral into the main line, into larger lines called trunk lines. And later on in the presentation, I'm going to be talking about trunk lines. But trunk lines, for those that may not be familiar, they provide service to many homes, a minimum of 1 million gallons per day. They're designed for up to 10 million gallons per day. Anything larger than 10 million gallons per day, that's where we get into the, I don't know if it's purple, but after D there, which is a pump station, that's the interceptor system. The interceptor system is all owned by the treatment. So when I spoke about the large area, I broke it up between collection and treatment. So the interceptor system is treatment, and that's where the other contributing agencies, the cities of Folsom, Sacramento, and West Sacramento, all share the interceptor system. In terms of statistics, Sac Sewer owns over 5,000 miles of pipe, ranging from 1¼ inch to 12 feet in diameter. Those would be the interceptor pipelines. 117 pump stations. Sacramento is relatively flat, so we can only gravity flow for so long before we have to pump it up. So I'm going to go to the next slide here. Host has spotlighted your video. Okay. So didn't know if I needed to stop. So now I'm going to get into some of our incentive and low income programs. So first we have the rate assistance program. And again, I'm going to be stepping through each one of these and explaining a little bit more. Impact fee deferral program, impact fee waiver program, a phased development agreement, regional economic development competitiveness program. It's a mouthful. The upper lateral loan program, septic tank conversion loan program, and the trunk reimbursement program. Okay. So the rate assistance program, or SILRAP, as we often refer to it. So this initiated in 2004, and it's paid for by non-rate and non-fee revenue. So things like interest on cash reserves, sale of surplus property, scrap metal, et cetera. So that's how we're able to fund this program. And it's for low-income customers, and they're eligible to receive an annual $175 rebate, and that's broken up into $150 for treatment and $25 for collection. And this was expanded in 2019 to include rebates for homeless shelters and temporary housing. So next I have the impact fee deferral program. And this allows customers to defer paying most of the impact fees for up to 5 years. Up to 90% for residential. You can defer fees for 90% for residential projects and 80% for commercial and industrial customers. And customers paying the impact fees are often, or they're given the option when paying a quote. And there's no interest for residential projects if the impact fees are paid within 60 months. And it's also subject to any impact fee increases over that time. Okay. Impact fee waiver program. This is available for low-income housing, and it's projects for housing or affordable rents that qualify. Each year, the treatment side, so there's 200, and we break it up into equivalent single-family dwellings or ESDs. A single home would be 1 ESD. Multifamily would be 0.75 ESD, so you would get more. That and 8 for the city of West Sacramento per year. Any unused impact fee waivers are rolled over and banked, so we have a bank of those. At the beginning of this year, I think there was a little less than 900 impact fee credits. I don't have the latest number, but that was as of late January. So next is the phase development agreements. So project proponents can defer collection system impact fees for a portion of the parcel not being developed. And impact fees are later due when that portion of the land is developed. And sometimes you see this area in more rural areas. You might see this where there is a public sewer system and say, for example, you have a very large piece of property. And within our expansion area, not so infill fees are significantly lower, but within the expansion area, impact fees for the collection side are around $26,000 per acre. And I had worked with a customer on this, and they had 10 acres with a single home. Most of it was all field, but they needed to connect to the sewer system, so you can see how much that would be. So this is, again, an example we had worked out where, hey, you're not using this portion of property, so we'll record an agreement to your property that a portion of impact fees have been paid. So there is this option. This is the Regional Economic Development Competitiveness Program, and this supports economic development in the region. So it pays up to half of the sewer impact fees for new or expanded commercial and industrial customers. So if it's a new business coming in, a business that's expanding to create jobs, we look at that. And depending on how many jobs, the way it's set up right now, we are looking at some revisions to this. But depending on how many jobs are created, up to 50% of the impact fee can be waived. Annually, we put in from the, again, non-rate, non-fee revenue that I had mentioned earlier, $1.225 million. So the next couple slides are some of our loan programs. So we have an upper lateral loan program. This is I think the third slide that I had gone over with the infographic showing the sewer system. The upper lateral is the private portion of the sewer system, a portion that Sac Sewer does not own or maintain. But as part of that, we do have low interest loans up to $15,000 to repair or replace that system because it can be pretty expensive when things go wrong. So the terms are up to 5 years and no interest for the Sewer Lifeline Rate Assistance Program customers, or SLRAP. Next is the septic tank conversion loan program, similar to the upper lateral loan program, a little different. This is for folks that are on septic systems and they want to connect to the public sewer, so it's a little more expensive. So loans for this are up to $25,000, and again, terms up to 5 years on this program. So this is I added this slide because I met with the BIA at the beginning of April. And this was a very popular slide, so I decided to leave it in for this presentation. But the trunk reimbursement program, again, these are the systems I had mentioned earlier that are designed to convey at least 1 million gallons per day, up to 10 million gallons per day before you get to the interceptor system. And it's really a program to reimburse the project proponent for certain costs associated with designing and constructing the trunk facilities. These are designed for very large areas, and there's a way to get reimbursed. So impact fees Impact fee credits can be used in the area served by the trunk, and developers do. There is a mechanism for developers or project proponents to transfer those credits to other developers within the area. And the collection system is reimbursing on projects accepted in 2021. I highlight that because that's big for the development community. 2021 is relatively recent. When I started, I was in the development services section at Sac Sewer, and at the time I joined in 2017, we were paying on projects I think accepted in 2008. That's a harder sell to developers about building trunk systems and waiting that long and the uncertainty. And while we can't provide that certainty, knowing that we're paying back on projects accepted in 2021 and soon to be 2022 is something good that we like to highlight with developers. And I think with that, that is all I have on the presentation. So I'm here to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Okay.
Oh.
Director Frost.
Yes. Yes.
Director Frost, if you could use your microphone, sorry.
I have a question relating to the septic conversions to public sewer.
Yes.
There was a state law that I had the impression at one time, many years ago, that was gonna require people to convert to public, and I don't wanna put you on the spot. I wonder if you know anything about that state law and if that's really true, that there's gonna be a drop dead date when people have to be converted over, if people that are at a certain elevation have to be converted over to public.
Okay. So I can't speak directly to the law. I'm not familiar, but I can speak a little more general if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I heard elevation and maybe what was meant is distance from a public sewer system. I'm not sure if it was elevation. It could be, but what Sac Sewer does is it's in its ordinance. If a public sewer system is within 200 feet from the property line and it's available, and I say it's available because it's pretty critical because not all systems were designed for maybe that home. And I won't get into all the details with that right now, but I mean, for example, the interceptor system, we don't typically allow single homes to connect to an interceptor pipe. As I mentioned, they're up to 12 feet in diameter. That's quite an obstacle and very difficult to do construction wise. Homes connect to main lines, the much smaller pipes, so that might be considered an available pipeline. But going back to what I was saying about the 200 feet, if you have an existing septic system and there's a sewer line under, less than the 200 feet, Sac Sewer doesn't just go out, nor am I aware of any enforcement agency go out and just say, you must connect. If your septic system is operating fine, it's not creating an issue, your property is of appropriate size, getting one, if you have a well on that property, that can change, and that's something EMD manages. But I'm not aware of anyone going out and forcing people to connect. Now, if your septic system fails, that's different. So at that point, EMD then points to Sac Sewer for the customer to come to us and work with us on having a connection. There's still ways to, dare I say, opt out, not connect. And now you're pushing my memory here. It's been a little while since I reviewed the ordinance, but I believe it's if the cost to connect to the public sewer is twice as much or more, then there's the cost criteria that applies, and you can repair your septic system. If you get quotes and to connect to the public sewer system is less than that, then the requirement is to connect. So
Oh,
does that
okay,
help?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
it's a lot of money. It's hard on people.
It is, and
A
that's
lot of
why
people can't afford it.
I'm sorry, and that's why we have that cost criteria. So again, allowing people, and it's often Sac Sewer is working with EMD, and the EMD kind of prompts that and says, hey, look, you seem to be closer than 200 feet. Sometimes they reach out to us. We look and go, yes, there is a sewer line, but it's not available. This was never designed for you to connect for various reasons, and that's not available. So then we would contact EMD and issue that waiver or give them our blessing saying, hey, they don't need to connect for these reasons. And EMD would then permit them to repair their septics typically.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Supervisor Hume.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh,
First of all, as
yeah.
a SAC Sewer board member,
Yeah.
I'd just like to say, if you've not been out to the regional facility, It is worth visiting, especially after the upgrade, to see how we're using 21st century technology and creating avenues of viable byproduct. The most exciting of which, in my estimation, is the harvest water, where we're going to be taking 50,000 acre feet of treated effluent down to put out onto farmland in
Yes.
order to take them off of the wells and recharge our aquifer. Very exciting stuff.
Mhm.
Relative to today's discussion and how the interface with the green means go, one of the challenges of repurposing properties within a built environment is the
Mhm.
complexity of the infrastructure that they're trying to adapt their project to that infrastructure. And so in addition to some of these partnerships, which I think are geared more towards construction and creation of new infrastructure, are we also exploring sort of creative solutions such as potentially like on-site storage that it can be built up and then released into the system, say overnight when there's less impact and less capacity, so that we're kind of getting more use out of the same infrastructure?
So in other words, if I understand, more metered,
Yeah.
the peak instantaneous flow might overwhelm the system based
Right.
on the evaluation. Yes, I can't think of any examples right now other than one in Rancho Cordova, which never ended up happening. They moved, but the long-term solution in Rancho Cordova is a large interceptor pipe that goes underneath the Folsom South Canal. It's
Okay.
very expensive, complex, and eventually will be built. We have to obviously work with the U.S. Bureau and so forth. As an interim solution, the on-site storage that you were referencing was considered. And at the time I was with Development Services, we met with the project proponent and we discussed how this would look, how it would how we would discharge and metered into the existing sewer system. So in other words, the sewer system wasn't designed to accommodate this development, but we
Right.
were working with them and getting trying to come up with creative solutions. So we have seen those. They're few and far between. But that's something that we can definitely look at on a case by case basis.
Well,
Yeah.
and therein lies the rub, right?
Yeah.
Is that the original infrastructure was sized
Yeah.
for an intended purpose
Yes.
or an anticipated use. And now that as we look to densify within that existing footprint, it's going to put more strain on that system.
Exactly.
Okay, thank
Yes.
you.
You're welcome.
Vice Mayor Aquino.
The upper lateral loan program,
Yes.
does that apply to residents in Folsom and West Sac in the city of Sacramento where you're only doing the treatment and not the collection?
That's a good question. I don't believe so. I would want to verify that. And the reason I say that, because the city of Folsom that you mentioned, the Sacramento Area Sewer District collection does not own or maintain the lower lateral, nor are customers within the city of Folsom customers for collection. They're all customers for treatment.
Right.
The two zones of benefit that I spoke to earlier, they're not. So I believe the requirement is you need to be a Sac Sewer collection customer. Again, I would want to confirm that before I said absolutely. What I can say is the septic tank conversion loan, anyone within the city limits of Folsom would be eligible for that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
If I could
Yeah,
frame this up a little bit,
Yeah.
I'm visiting
Yeah.
Lunar today. I'm usually a transportation committee member. We met this morning, but I'm visiting Lunar today because of this topic.
Yeah.
Being here. I was board chair a couple years ago and we sort of launched this effort at Regional Sand. And I think most of you may have heard my restaurant story, but I'm not sure all of you have.
Yeah,
Has everybody heard the restaurant story?
yeah, yeah.
No? Okay, I'll repeat it in short.
It's
So
problematic.
Folsom Boulevard, we have enormous interest in reinventing Folsom Boulevard, renewing business along Folsom Boulevard. It's very difficult. It's hard, old, commercial infill corridor. And all of us have these. These are universal. Every single jurisdiction has these old places that generally just get skipped by development because they're too hard to deal with. Well, here's an example of why it's too hard. So we had a Denny's restaurant, I think, that had closed. And it was being operated, but a well-known bakery in the region came along and said, we want that spot. It's right across from light rail. It's a dense, we're gonna do something different there. It's gonna be creative. It's gonna be great. But what did they run into? They ran into, first issue was the grease trap under the Denny's restaurant was, I'm gonna make it up because I don't remember the details, a 1985 model. And the standard had been updated in 1993. And now instead of being 5 feet wide, it needed to be 5 feet 6 inches wide. So That one, under the code, had to be ripped out and a new one had to be put in. And, oh, while you're doing that, you better update the sewer line from here to here. And then the water agency came along and said, you know, your water pipe is this big, but we really prefer them to be this big. So now from that end of the block, from this end of the block, you're gonna redo the sewer line. SMUD came along and said, you know, we got that transformer up there, but it's this big. We need one this big now. So you're gonna replace that transformer. And the city came along and said, oh, man, you know, you missed having an ADA friendly parking lot by 1/4 of a degree. Right? Because the old standard was fine, but now it's a little less steep. So suddenly, all these things, I'm cutting some out here, drainage was an issue, everything was an issue. That's typical infill, everything's an issue. So instead of being able to go there, they saved $1.4 million and went to the Greenfield side of Rancho Cordova, where they built a nice place, and I go there all the time. And it's wonderful, but it's not in the right place. It was supposed to be in this Green Means Go corridor, and why wasn't it? It's kind of everybody sitting at this table's fault, right? Because we're setting up these systems that say, boy, you come in an infill, you're gonna pay through the nose, you're gonna fix all of our old problems there. We haven't found a better way around that. We're creating these commercial zones that can't be developed. And the exciting thing about Green Means Go is that this is a way to address it. Now, for the first time, there's money flowing that we're trying to do something about these infill areas, but this will be a continual problem. I mean, the sum total of what Regional Sand or Sac Sewer is gonna spend a year on those programs is less than $1 million, right? I would assume.
The Confluence program, is
Yeah,
that what you're
all
referring
the,
to?
like economic development stimulus stuff.
Yeah,
It's gonna be in that sort of neighborhood. This
Mhm.
one project had more than $1 million worth of problems.
Right.
Just to like put a scale on this. Until someone in this region stands up and says, we're gonna tackle this problem. And I would say the goal should be get to 0 fees on infill. Whatever gets designated an old commercial corridor, all the agencies, SMUD, water agencies, sewer, the goal should be 0 fees for that. Because even with 0 fees, they're still gonna have challenges. You know, we can't fix ADA. There's no way to get rid of that problem. There's no way to say you don't need to update the old sidewalk or whatever it is. Some things have to be done. They're still gonna have issues, but
Yeah.
we can stimulate that sort of infill if we can figure out how to knock down all this other stuff. What stands in our way are things like Prop 218, which says you can't take general ratepayer revenue and use it to subsidize infill, even though it would be good for everybody if we did that. Can't do that. So in Regional Sand's case, we would have to find some extra revenue, not fee-based, not service-based, another revenue. Selling water that we were recycling,
Yeah.
selling the electricity we generate from solar back to SMUD. Some sort of revenue like that so we could turn around and use it to subsidize infill. Or find some other regional source. And each one of these utilities, I think SMUD could find a way, honestly, because they're very pro-development, pro-infill. They can probably find a way easier than anybody else. But all these other agencies, we're gonna have to tackle. And my biggest challenge in talking about this for years is everybody will agree with me. But who is actually the point on this? What agency is best situated to be point on this problem? You might say Metro Chamber, that won't work, we all know that. Who could do it? Each of us in our own individual jurisdictions, way too hard, right? We can't deal with all the different agencies. There's only one place where we all come together to deal with this. Here we are, this group. So at some point, SACOG, which has initiated the commercial corridor study, how many years ago, James? 4 years ago? And has now devolved that into Green Means Go, is gonna have to tackle this problem. And the great thing is, if we do this, we'll all be famous. No one has accomplished this anywhere that I'm aware of. But it is a heavy lift. So the question to my fellow colleagues here on this committee is, do we want to instruct staff to take on that sort of a challenge? And I know we just did the work plan a couple months ago. A month ago, maybe, I'm not sure. But anyway, I think we have to think long-term, we have to think big. And it's particularly for the mission of this agency, but it's really for the mission of each one of us in our own jurisdictions sitting here. And that's my story about the restaurant that went in the wrong place.
You're right, I
And-
agree with you.
Well, and
How do we get there?
And I think we've started at least the regional working together, right? Not the super region, but the working with SMUD and RT and us. And so to add in Sac Sewer, Regional Sand to that might be a good fit where everybody's in the room to accomplish that.
So one thing I can add to that, Director Sander, is for the on the collection side. Let's go back to the fees, because I am aware of all the different fees, and I can only speak to really two: the collection side and the treatment side for Sac Sewer. For Sac Sewer collection, and really treatment as well, they're property based, not owner based. And I bring that up because let's use the restaurant example within the infill area. When we hear infill, I have to, it's usually a pretty safe assumption at one point fees had been paid on that property. It's not automatic, but a lot more likely than say if you go out into the expansion area, right, in new development, what's the likelihood fees have been paid? Why would they be paid? So when I say it's property based, if those fees have ever been paid, the impact fees, they're not due for the treatment, or I'm sorry, the collection side. Now, treatment has different categories, so they may or may not be due. Again, I only bring that up. It's a piece of the pie that you bring up, or a piece of the problem, but it can help often. Now, it can create some issues with property owners sometimes when they pay fees and they want to get up and move and go, well, I paid those fees, they belong to me, I want to take them to this other property. So that would be the argument. But right now, we don't have a mechanism for that. The impact fees stay to the property. So they leave, the fees stay on that, and they have to build that into the cell. So I wanted to add that. Again, not claiming that it solves the problem, but just it does help. So.
Okay, any other comments or questions? I think it's a great idea, at least get our heads in the same room, and I agree with Director Sander that this would be the likely place to get that at least done and explore. I like the idea that in our meeting the other day, Clint talked about growing a partnership with Sac Sewer, and I think that to move forward with that would be very appropriate. Oh, Chair Villegas. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I like the idea as well. I think maybe as a next step, suggesting that maybe staff go through at least an exercise in assessing kind of what are the key questions in terms of opportunities, challenges. I mean, I think obviously Sac Sewer is an enterprise operation, so it has sort of limitations on how and what it should be doing. To what extent, the land use authority is kind of a critical component. I mean, we all represent local jurisdictions, and we certainly don't want unilateral authority, undermining our authority. So we want to maintain that authority, but yet have the capacity to be more collaborative. So I think maybe just as a first step, having staff, go through an exercise of what are the questions and put those on the table.
Clint, go ahead. Director Frost.
I just wanted to comment on Director Sanders' comments. I do think this is something we've been talking about for a long time. It kind of started when we were talking about ADUs and how do we figure out how to build, how someone can build an ADU in their backyard without having to pay $250,000, because you could bring a manufactured home and put it down, but the fees, and it might cost $80,000 at the time, and the fees were like $125,000. So it was cost prohibitive, this idea of trying to encourage density, and actually it was something people really wanted to do. And we were trying to figure out how can we lower it? Can we do architectural renderings that if they pick this, stamped architectural created by the county that's already been approved, then they don't have to pay that $10,000 fee. But there was still the idea of water and sewer and parking and everything else that went along with it. And I know all about infill. There's a lot of old properties in my district that are asbestos properties that no one even wants to touch it. They're like trying to just patch it up and keep going and keep the money coming in. It's cheaper to do that right now than for someone coming in to redo everything and then have to meet all the requirements of the infrastructure, the road infrastructure and complete streets and everything that goes along with it. An example was a restaurant in Orangevale that they wanted to remodel a bathroom just to make it ADA compliant. And in order to do that, they had to put in a stoplight. And it was like, are you kidding me? It wasn't gonna work, you know, so that was like a lot of money to put in a
That's a busy
stoplight.
bathroom.
So I think, I really agree with, the idea of having the conversation. When I first got elected in 2017, one of the first things we did was we tried to make a list of every fee, you know, because we were really trying to zero in on the cost and what can we do to make this, fix this problem? And no one could really zero in on the fees or the mitigation because it's different in different places, I guess. And with different entities like Sac Sewer and SMUD and
Mhm.
PG&E and water and the list, how old is the neighborhood, and the list goes on. And so we worked on it for a long time. We're still working on it, I guess. But you know, the conversation kind of died out because no one really knew where to start. And I think infill is challenging at best, you know, not only politically with the community, but it's challenging with the idea that you have to tear it down in order to build. Don't tell anyone I said this, build back better. So, but I agree with Director, I love the idea that let's have that conversation of how we can make it's the trifecta of failure in California. Regulation, litigate fees, regulation, and litigation. It all comes down to all the regulatory oversight makes everything more expensive, but we know what's best in our local communities, and we can't give up local control or, you know, our local authority over some of those important decisions in our neighborhoods, I think. And so I agree with Director Villegas relating to local control, but love the idea of what can we do to make it incentivize. Love the idea. What can we do to incentivize the goals?
If I can add just a couple of quick points. One is, one of the things we're working on right now, and Dylan has helped us with this a little bit, is we're trying to pull together a scope that we could issue in a request for proposals where we could do kind of a more region-wide infrastructure assessment. We went through a process when we developed all the green zones to what do you need in this green zone to incentivize development? And we paid for some of that. But I think there is still at least on our end, because we have so many special districts around the region, to the point that about the restaurant, we just don't know the magnitude of investment needed in every green zone. We know a lot of the low hanging fruit and we've been able to go after that, but we need kind of what is the total cost? And so we're having special districts help us, we don't have the capacity or the expertise here to really know what we're wading into. And so having partnerships with Sac Sewer, other special districts, right now we're trying to map all of the special districts that we have that attach to any green zone, so we know who we're reaching out to. Then if we can get somebody to go in and work with those special districts, what are the infrastructure constraints on this? This is what we want to see happen. This is what's in the local plan. This is what's in our regional plan. What would it cost to upgrade these things? That allows us to go and do the grant making at the federal level or the state level to come back, and maybe we pay for that stuff. But when we pay for it, that has to turn into a removal of those fees so that you're not double charging, right? So that is one thing that we are doing in a place where the partnerships and the expertise from the special districts is critical. The other thing I wanted to ask is if you could talk a little bit about, you have the Confluence program you spoke to, but I think you also have an infill working group that came out of direction from your board. I don't know if I'm using the right
No, that's the board infill committee and
Infill
there's,
committee.
yes, and there's at least a couple board members here that sit on this. Was there anything in
If you could,
particular?
if you could
I mean,
speak a little bit about to the
Yeah,
charge
s-
of the infill committee and what your kind of process has been, when it's going to wrap up and what the expected kind of, what
Well-
comes out of that at the end.
Okay, so it's an ad hoc committee. So our last meeting may be at the end of this month, but it doesn't have to be. We were given some direction to look at certain programs and we're doing so and bring back recommendations to that smaller ad hoc committee. And then from there, that would go to Sac Sewer's larger 17 board member, entire board. So yes, we're really, a lot of it is talking about some of the programs, some of which I covered today, reporting back. We get questions from the board members in that committee. Hey, what did you spend on this as part of the confluence for the last 5 years? So we'll run reports and bring that back to the committee, and then from there look at possible options to explore. Hey, you're not spending much here. Is there an option to shift funds to another program that could incentivize, with developments within the infill area? Something important that's maybe worth noting is that is an infill committee. Our Confluence program is for our entire service area. Now, obviously, certain programs out of that might be a little bit more geared towards maybe the infill area, for example. But it doesn't look at it and go, well, if you can only use this if you're part of the infill, community. You can only use this expansion. It's kind of created for all of our customers. Does that help and answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Kind of what kind of recommendations maybe come out of the back of
I don't know if we're still working on those because we got some recommendations at our last meeting. I think it was just April 24th. I think it was the end of April. So we're working through some of those right now, but some of them are focused on the infill areas.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Dylan, thank you for coming today. Great presentation, and as a jurisdiction that isn't connected literally to your organization, it really sparked some question about our own facilities and stuff. So thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you for
And,
having me.
Vice Chair Lozano, for the record, there's no public comment on this item.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Vice Chair Lozano, I mean, you made the point about the agencies we're trying to work with and develop stronger relationships with. I think Sac Sewer is one of the more recent ones because of things that you all and Director Sandra, you've said. If Green Means Go is going to be successful, it's very clear to us that we need to continue. Remember, your re-scripted mission statement is convene and connect the region, right? And so we do see that as part of our job is to at least begin developing much better working relationships with a lot of our special districts and our around the region. So as much as you all are the Sac Sewer members as well, if you can keep cross-fertilizing with us, I mean, I hear you, Director Sander, right? What can we do to help Sac Sewer? And I think Clint mentioned this opportunity in this infrastructure study that we want to get out there with an RFP. Because my sense from what you've said is you can't by Prop 218 just say no more fees. But you could have some creative ways of generating sources of revenue to then underwrite the fees, right? And so I think if that's what we're hearing, we will continue to work with Sac Sewer and try to run that to ground and maybe run it to ground as part of this RFP.
Well, I think, yeah, if there are extra grant dollars out there we could chase someday, that's great. There just has to be some sort of an organizational structure that looks at the sum total of this problem. Right, because Sac Sewer could go a long way down their bit, but that may only relieve 5% of the problem in the region. I don't know. Some percentage of it, right? Other agencies are gonna have to get involved and relieve their pieces. But if we end up in a place where you could tell the infill developer, look at the green zones. If you're in a green zone, no fees. That will inspire some investment. Because right now they're running around trying to figure out how to manipulate the fees in all the different agencies. And they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars doing that, trying to make a project pencil. We eliminate that. We could actually incentivize infill development, which would be good for all of us.
I think also guidance on the best path to
Director Frost, if you could just, sorry.
I think also giving them guidance on the best path to mitigating or meeting the goals, green mean go goals. I mean, I feel like some of the comments that I get are, what can we do to achieve, what are the most impactful things that will achieve the goals that you want us to achieve? And so sometimes that, I don't know if, I know that's different with infill possibly, but I don't know.
I think that's a good comment. I mean, if we figure out that maybe Sac Sewer is 50% of the barrier, we should know that. I don't know what it is.
I don't know what the
But-
barrier, I guess in some places it's transportation.
Mhm.
I guess it depends on the location. It's kind of hard to cookie cutter that, really.
Okay. Last call. Okay. We're going to move on to item 3, City of Rancho Cordova planning activities, corridor revitalization and infill housing. Mr. Chu.
Great, thank you. I'm Greg Chu with the planning staff here at SACOG, and periodically we bring the efforts of a local agency when it comes to infill and things like Green Means Go to this committee just to give you an update on local efforts. Happens to be Folsom Boulevard in Rancho Cordova and the efforts of Mill Crossing. So today we have Stefan Heisler, the housing planner from the city of Rancho Cordova. He's going to talk about specifically the Mill Crossing infill project.
Perfect. Great. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Stefan Heisler, housing manager for the city of Rancho Cordova. Thank you for having me to kind of give you an update on our Mills Crossing project, which is one of those really big, exciting projects that is implementing and enabled by Green Means Go. So I'll be running through a few different categories. I thought I had a little bit less time, but it sounds like it can take a little more time. I'll still go quick because there's a lot of slides, but I'm going to cover a project overview, some background history, some of our process of how we kind of made this project sausage, current status, next steps, funding strategy, and lessons learned. And like any good local government employee, I am totally recycling old PowerPoints that we've been using over the last 4 years. So you'll see things that maybe are not totally up to date on this one. So starting with the project overview, I want to give you a sense of where the location of this site is. The Mills Crossing project is located at the intersection of Folsom Boulevard and Matherfield Road, adjacent to our Matherfield Mills Station, RT light rail station, adjacent to Folsom Lake College's Rancho Cordova Center, and located within a green zone, of course, and a disadvantaged neighborhood. The goal of this project is really to start creating a central gathering place and a very vibrant hub of activity along Folsom Boulevard within the north part of our city, and focusing around wellness, community, and arts. And really looking beyond just the boundaries of our individual sites and kind of trying to be that catalyst for the entire corridor and generating infill development. We're looking at the connections between neighboring properties with the community college and beyond. How can we spur retail on those other properties that are less utilized? So a little bit of background history on this project. Really thinking around this site began very early in our cityhood. In 2006, we had our first sort of look at this project with a different landowner. Office and retail was sort of a key component fronting Folsom Boulevard with housing in the back. And then we were able to acquire the site in 2018, which is a whole nother story for another day. But following the similar theme of community serving uses in the front and then residential and more passive or recreational uses in the back. And then we issued a request for qualifications, and eventually the city selected development partner Griffin Swinnerton and Related Housing. And their proposal also included sort of flexible community spaces in the front, centered around a central gathering plaza, as well as housing in the back. And really focusing on connections between all of the different uses and looking beyond the site as well. So to talk about the process of this really large project, how do we kind of go from nothing until construction? So that began with the visioning process once the city owned the site and began or kind of continued into exclusive negotiations with the development partner to kind of create a very draft sketch informed concept or development plan. You can kind of see the rough sketch of the site plan is sort of theoretical. What can we put here? What are some ideas? What makes sense? And now we're actually moving into, or we're well into the next phase, which is that pre-development, where we're taking those concepts and we're turning those into fully designed and approved and financeable projects with grant funding supporting it. And then hopefully by the end of next year, we'll be going into that construction phase, and then hopefully grand opening 2026, 2027 timeframe. So at that beginning, as I mentioned, we threw a bunch of things against the wall to see kind of what would stick. With some initial community feedback, as well as our visioning process, we kind of found these three themes of community arts, innovation around education and makerspaces, and holistic wellness, with a couple of tangential components of flexible meeting and gathering space, as well as commercial space. So we took those and kind of put those into this, conceptual site plan. And what we ended up selecting, or what our city council ended up selecting, was sort of a combination of the plaza and the park or green open space. And even still, the education makerspaces still found a way into the final as well, which I'll get into. And here you can kind of see then how we plan to use even the open spaces as a critical component to making this a vibrant destination and really being able to program that to bring people to Folsom Boulevard. So here is that preferred development alternative that kind of ended that sort of pre-development or that first negotiation phase. And of course, we did a lot of additional refinements from here that I'll share in a second. And so taking that initial concept and then trying to then take it to the next phase of what does this building actually look like, we did a lot of community outreach, including pop-ups at community events. We had key stakeholder interviews. We had coffees with the mayor. And those all culminated more or less in our May 2023 design charrette, which is sort of the hallmark event at City Hall where we were able to bring people in and get a lot of feedback as to kind of what potential architectural character does this building need to take does it need to kind of start envisioning, as well as the key pieces of that to really point our design team into the right direction so they know how to begin designing these buildings. As well as the outdoor space. So we got a lot of feedback on the critical components for outdoor, such as a water feature and market plaza, outdoor stage and events, and wellness walk, and really kind of taking that feedback and then merging it into the best of both worlds. We had a couple different options that we were considering and starting to array those onto our site plan. So to bring you to current status and next steps, it took us 4 years to get to that point, but it took us 4 minutes to get there in slides. So you're getting the accelerated version here. And here you can kind of see, what it's going to start to taking a look like, or starting to take shape as. And these are not the final product. There's still some additional refinements, but really kind of getting a first look and feel of what these buildings are going to actually look like. So our refined site plan, which is sort of where we're going to end up landing, is focusing still on 3 community buildings fronting Folsom Boulevard, as well as that green space, open passive recreation in the back with future expansion opportunities. And then sort of in the brownish, on my screen is usually orange, over there it's orange, we'll have single family residential as well as multifamily residential. So I have a little bit of both. And then here you can kind of see how they're coming up into 3D and starting to frame Folsom Boulevard and create this space. So to talk more specifically about the uses that we've landed on, ultimately it's going to be about an 80,000 to 92,000 square foot facility, including in building 1, about 20,000 square feet for a community health center and 18,000 square feet of community commercial space. In building 2, it'll be about 25 to 30,000 square feet of arts focused, so a 300-seat black box theater, as well as classrooms and rehearsal spaces for the arts. And then building 3 will be about 14,000 square feet, including 9,000 square feet for community commercial events and nonprofit space, and 5,000 square feet for what we're planning to have is a commercial kitchen incubator. And then there's the opportunity for expanding it into a building 4, which would be more of a formal events and banquet hall. So here's a look at what the building 1 kind of starting to feel like. Again, so the community commercial on one side and then the health clinic on the other. And building 2, which is going to be that arts, that flexible black box theater, rehearsal and classroom spaces. And here's kind of a look in the evening at how we can bring even more uses out of the building in the evening to program those public open spaces. And then building 3, so on the north end would be that flexible community space with connections to outdoor areas. So you can kind of spill your event out into the plaza. And then on the Folsom Boulevard side, on the right side of the screen, would be our community, or our commercial kitchen incubator, with opportunities to both do, business generation and catering business, but also have a window open to the plaza to serve residents during events. And here's a look sort of at the plaza itself. So, committee members, once you're done making the weighty decisions of land use and natural resources, you can come over to Mills Crossing and enjoy a relaxing afternoon on the plaza. And then also here's a look at sort of an illustrative view of what the housing can be in the area as well. So if you've seen anything exciting today, we'll be passing around a roster sheet or sign-up sheet. If you'd like, we can stay in contact for the future housing units on the site. And then here's sort of a schedule of where we are today and where we're moving into 2024. So specifically, we're finalizing our EIR. This year, we're also finalizing schematic design and design development of the buildings. We're entering pre-construction, so we're getting to a guaranteed maximum price for the city, and then finalizing our last few additional grant applications while we have time before we enter construction, and then finalizing our MOUs with the premier anchor tenants and our occupancy partners. So I'll talk a few minutes or a couple minutes about our funding strategies. You can see sort of a laundry list of funding sources that we've been able to secure for the project, starting with the California Department of Healthcare Services, funding $7 million for our community wellness or health clinic facility. So that's a big component. We've also been knocking pretty heavily on SACOG's door, and Green Means Go has been a major partner for this project with early activation and capital as well, really focusing on the infrastructure costs of the project to help this catalyze further development on the corridor. And also kind of component to that with REAP 2.0 is the California Department of Housing High Impact Transformative Project. And then we have a couple applications pending with the California Natural Resources Agency and the Urban Greening Program to help fund our outdoor spaces. And of course, we're knocking on our federal partners' doors for the community project funding. And then fair warning, heads up to everybody here, we're looking at the Valley Vision California Jobs First funding program. So hopefully you're not intimidated by our proposal, but even if you are, we welcome the competition, but we hope that's gonna be an application later this year. And then new market tax credits is another major opportunity for this project because it is gonna be a job generator. So that's an important component to funding this project overall. And then a key piece also is partner investments. And it's kind of that, who can we get into the project who can really help us support the funding of it and help think through, market lease payments that help us kind of create the bonds to build the units themselves and continue that operations. So overall, we've got a hefty amount of funding dedicated to the project already. And this is really just focusing on the community commercial pieces. This is really not looking yet at the residential part, but I'm happy to talk about that if there's questions. So some lessons learned, maybe the most important part of this is, I'd say there's several. So selecting the partner, I think, has been a really key piece of this. We've already been at it for 4 years, and projects like this kind of span across so many different dimensions of development. You have to go through conceptuals, through design, through community outreach, all the way through construction, and kind of maintaining those relationships for many years, right? We're already 4 years in, probably have another 2 to 3 to go. And we're meeting every week for the last 4 years. So those relationships and that key partnership is really important. Of course, it goes without saying, community involvement. I think, we've really been supported by the community, that there's like a broad base of support around health and wellness, as well as the arts, which has been really beneficial. I think some of the less seamless parts of community involvement have been trying to tell people and explain how we can't fit everything you'd like to see on this one project. The project site really can't fit it all, and we can't afford it all. So I think that's been kind of one of those pieces, as well as the housing piece, of course. So some people say no housing whatsoever. And then there's other people that say you need 10 times the amount of housing. So ultimately, we landed on about 100 plus units, which is really a factor of helping the city accomplish our requirements through the Surplus Land Act. And that's another conversation we can have. And then the last thing I think with community involvement is kind of in the parking conversation. That's really one of those Goldilocks types of issues where you don't want too much, you don't want too little, you got to get it just right. You know, we don't want too much parking because then there's trade-offs around cost if you have to go structured, or you know, making enough space available on the site. So you're sacrificing other uses that has to go to parking. But you don't want too little because you don't want impacts to the neighborhood. I think ultimately from a staff perspective, you know, we want this project to be filling up all of the parking spaces a lot of the time, because that is what a successful project would look like, right? A lot of people coming and activating the site. I think if we, at the end of the day, if we had empty parking spaces on the site, that wouldn't necessarily be a sign that we're providing enough parking. That's maybe more of a sign that we aren't activating the site enough. So one of those tough community involvement issues. Then location, location, location. And this is really helpful around grant funding applications. So every time we look at a grant application, I'm copying and pasting adjacent to light rail and adjacent to community college and within a green zone and within disadvantaged community. And those are really helpful criteria for bringing those critical funding to the project. And then, of course, lessons learned around grant funding. So sort of a triple-edged sword with grant funding. Obviously, we depend on it. But then, interestingly, once you secure it, it comes with strings attached and timelines for expenditure. So it really kind of puts some boundaries around where your window of opportunity to get the project completed. And then as we've recently learned that you can have executed agreements and still the funding may be taken away from you. So triple-edged sword there. And the last one, not on the screen, is sort of, I referred to it a little bit, is those windows of opportunities. So projects like these don't really have an infinite time frame. You kind of begin with an opportunity, but you have a window of opportunity to get that completed. So whether priorities change or if you're crossing, you know, many years, there's different risks involved with that, as well as inflation constantly cutting away at what you're available to accomplish. So that window of opportunity doesn't stay open forever. Something to think about as you're considering maybe some of these projects in your jurisdictions. And then last but not least, really just a teaser is construction and operations. So, you know, we are going to be, as I mentioned, we're going to be entering construction here in a year or less. And in a couple of years, you can probably have me back and I can share some more lessons learned around the constructions and operations of the project. So I'll end there and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay. Any questions? Supervisor Hume.
Not a question. I just want to say, very excited about this project. I like the reinvestment in Old Rancho along this aging corridor. I hope that it complements the MAC very well. I hope someday to look at my calendar and say, well, am I going to go to the thing over in Lincoln Village or am I going to the thing over at Mills Crossing? I don't, you know, since you're going to have two very vibrant spaces. And the one thing that I will say is, and why I brought it up is Lincoln Village to me seems to be a success of where you have a mix of higher density adjacent as well as that sort of pseudo-urban townhome walk-up type use that I think creates a good synergy of density. And so encourage, I know that there's consternation over the inclusion of housing on this site that could have been entirely public use. The unfortunate reality is that the development paradigm is such that housing often pays the freight for a lot of the other cool stuff to get done. And so having that component there, I think enables some of those other very public-facing uses. Can you tell me about a rough idea of the mix you're looking for the multifamily versus the townhome as far as within that 100 units or so?
Yeah, sure. So the goal really is 100 units, and that, as I mentioned, is sort of the Surplus Land Act requirement for, you know, it's a small exception within the Surplus Land Act. If you provide at least 100 units, if you issued an RFP before September 2019, and you've got at least 100 units, at least 25% are affordable, then you can kind of use a different set of Surplus Land Act guidelines. So for this project, it is a little bit kind of tricky space-wise, but we're looking at probably 50-50 between affordable multifamily and market rate townhomes.
Okay. And so this is actually going to be surplus. So then that invokes the fact that the first consideration has to go towards low-income housing.
Well, so that's the exception that we were able to get under. So we are able to, we don't have to go through that lengthy process and put it out there. We've done our procurement and we're under that exception, so we can move forward with both the community facilities, which are going to be city owned, as well as the housing, which is not going to be city owned. But because of that exception, we don't have to go through that whole availability process.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you.
Anyone else? Any other comments or questions?
Can I just ask, what's the total acreage of that area?
So the vacant land itself is about 10 acres. Adjacent to us is the community college. They have a phase 1 that's built and room for phases 2 and 3. But we're actually working with them because the phase 3 plans are sort of far away that we're going to kind of interim use some of their space. Yeah.
Vice Chair Lozano, if there
Yes.
are other board questions. Look, I think this is, as Director Sander knows, we've been invested in this project for quite some time. I think either Stefan or Director Sander, one of the key other lessons learned I remember from hearing from you all was that the city bought the land. Is that right? So you basically controlled the site. And how important was that in the mix of this?
Oh, hugely important. I don't, Director Sander, Mayor Sander, if you'd.
All important. I mean, there's a pretty crazy redevelopment story buried in here where the community college was trying desperately to get land to build the campus, ask us to be their front using redevelopment because they didn't wish to use their own condemnation authority. We acquired the property, but there was litigation involved. A jury downtown decided this was the most valuable acreage in Sacramento County, bar none. It was $1.3 million an acre, I think is what, some price like that they'd set on it. No, it's like $1 million an acre, like $1 million an acre. Community college district was still like, oh, we can still work with that. But then Governor Brown killed off redevelopment, so the whole project's vanished. And the guy who owned it didn't want to sell it, and then he passed away, and his kids were like, for sale. So we
$1
got
million
it.
an acre?
No. Almost, yeah, I think we paid what, two or three million for
Yeah.
the whole thing.
2.8.
Yeah. But if you don't control the ground, you don't control anything, really. So, and what we found along Folsom Boulevard is you can invest a lot of money. We've spent 50 or 60 million grant dollars on upgrading infrastructure within the, like drainage within the street, landscaping along the street. And if you look for how much public or private investment has come to follow that public investment, virtually none. Because of all the barriers we just talked about in the previous item, right? And so these are the links we're going to try to stimulate development along that old infill corridor.
And I think that's really helpful, right? Because we have a lot of areas in commercial corridors where the ownership is split up among, like you think of the old retail strip malls, like multiple ownerships on, very hard to get. Some of them may be vacant, right? And some of them may be absentee owners. We heard that through the commercial corridor task force time and again. And then Stefan, you mentioned, the thing about grant funding is a triple-edged sword. And sometimes you can get grant funding and it may get taken away. Can you go backwards a couple of
Oh,
the
sure.
slides to the funding stack?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to congratulate the city of Rancho staff here and Director Sander was in on the ground floor of this. What if we could create some money at the state level for Green Means Go? And we were able to do that from a big collective regional effort. Not only did you qualify for the Green Means Go regional fund, but that REAP 2.0 HIT 4 million, that's a statewide competition that you all were able to pull down money at a state level in a highly competitive program as part of the REAP 2.0. So that's amazingly remarkable that you've done that. And I think it's because of the vision and the perseverance you've had. However, we've talked about the threat to Green Means Go, and you said one hand giveth, the other taketh away. Well, this is the money that's under risk right now. State budget cuts. So when we're asking for your help still in this last home stretch here in the state budget, we're talking about that 5 million there. And I believe we're also talking potentially about the 4 million. So a lot of our communities have stop work orders on our Green Means Go grants because the governor's budget proposed clawing back half of that Green Means Go funding from 2021 to meet state goals. So when we ask you for help, this is why we're asking you for help.
Of course, the other irony is we'd be done, except we're waiting for what EIR is one of our, getting the environmental process done through the state is enormously time consuming.
I have a quick question about when you move into the development of the housing, how is that going to work in terms of the property ownership and what's the timing if you are going to transfer? What does that look like?
Sure. So So with the Surplus Land Act, we have a requirement to be within a development agreement within, I think, by the end of 2027. So that's fortunately been extended a couple times through statute, which is really helpful for us. But the ownership wise, for the single family, our strategy there is to work with a commercial developer who would purchase. We would subdivide it, or we would sort of create sort of the opportunity and sell it as a large lot area. Then they would further subdivide it and build the typical kind of market rate single family product. For the affordable side, that's going to be like kind of your vanilla tax credit affordable housing project where we've identified the developer as part of the procurement. So we're working with Related California. The city owns the land. We'll work with Related directly on sort of the logistics and the funding and the preparation of that project for a tax credit application.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thanks.
Thank you, Stefan, for
Yeah.
coming. And
And Vice Chair Lozano, for the record, there's no public comment on this item.
thank you. Okay. And moving on to the next item, which is item 4, 2025 Blueprint Transportation Funding Outlook. Clint.
Yeah, so my slide deck gets pulled up here. I just wanted to give a kind of an overview or an introduction to and what's going to be an upcoming big kind of set of discussions and talking points and decisions for the board, and that is on the kind of the investment strategy for the plan. And a big part of that is for the long range blueprint. We've been talking a lot about the land use pattern at your board meeting in a couple of weeks. We're talking about kind of that option 3 that you wanted us to explore more out of the last board meeting. We'll bring that to your board meeting. So a lot of conversation about land use. In June, we'll be asking you to consider actually I've got a calendar here on my slide deck. So in June, we'll be asking you to consider taking action on locking in those land use patterns so that we can start marrying up a transportation investment strategy to those. So you're dark in July. and August, we really want to start digging in on that transportation component. So a big part of doing that, it's not just marrying up a transportation system, multimodal system to that land use, it's doing that in a financially constrained way. So I want to talk about a little bit what financial constraint is for this plan, how much money we're talking through. These are kind of preliminary estimates of what we'll be planning for over the next 3 decades roughly. And then differences from your last plan, what things have changed that are affecting these revenue forecasts, and then what are the options that we have for capturing additional revenues, and then some of those next steps. So what is fiscal constraint? So a critical requirement, a federal requirement of our plan, it can't just be a vision list. It has to be tied to a set of reasonably available revenues. And what is reasonably available? It's going to depend on the revenue source. The burden is you have to provide enough evidence to say, yes, this is reasonable. This is based on either if it's a brand new sales tax, you want to show there's political support for this, there's public support for this. We have a plan to get this in place for this plan. Things like on existing sources, you've got the federal trust fund. We know that the federal trust fund is heading towards insolvency. It's not keeping up. The excise tax from the federal government just doesn't keep up. But that's been happening for a long time. And the federal government has a standing policy. They're bailing it out with general fund. So it's kind of common practice. You assume that's going to continue happening in the future. That's reasonable to assume going into the future. In California, it hasn't been the same dynamic. We haven't been using general fund to bail out, say, the STIP and things like that. So it wouldn't be reasonable to assume the STIP is going to see massive increases when we are seeing fuel taxes decline over time. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So it's really about the program and do you have a reasonable case for this? The other part of financial constraint is identification of funding shortfalls. It's okay that you can't afford everything that you want. In our region, we have about a $500 million shortfall a year just for maintaining our system, our streets and road system. You just need to identify that is a shortfall in your plan. That is another obligation of the long range plan. And then where you have new strategies for revenues or making your revenues go further, you've got to identify all of those strategies. That's kind of bleeds into your policy element. So how much money are we planning for? About $37 billion over a 25-year period is what we're planning for. And what is that? It's hard. It's a big number over 25 years. What does that actually mean? So compared to the last plan, that was a 20-year horizon, so about 5 fewer years. But year over year, it was a more it's a more generous revenue forecast. We're seeing this one kind of come down a little bit on kind of your annual average. And I'll talk about, there's two main reasons that I want to talk about that we're seeing some changes in this revenue forecast. But here I've got the regional funding programs across the top. Those are what you as the SACOG board control. So that is the regional funding program. You take actions on it roughly every 2 years. That funding comes from a variety of sources. It comes from federal sources and it comes from state sources, but kind of the ultimate decision lands with this board. And then there's a lot of federal programs, and you're seeing an increase in those federal programs over time. And that is a key element that I want to talk about a little bit more. State programs staying roughly consistent, but state programs are very, very sensitive to fuel taxes and sales taxes. And on the fuel tax side, I'm going to dig into that a little bit more, especially with the Clean Cars Act 2 that's coming out and the executive order that California will switch to all zero emission or electric by 2035 for new car sales. That has big implications for how we pay for transportation. And then local revenues, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but these are both the local revenues that are generated through, your impact fees, general fund contributions, things like that. But you also get funding that comes directly to you through the state, through fuel taxes, various gas tax subventions and things like that. And so there are strings attached to those. These aren't all fully locally controlled dollars, right? So where does this money come from? I mentioned fuel tax is a big part. Today, more than half of our funding comes from fuel taxes. Looking at the plan, we've got some new sales taxes planned in this region, one in Placer County, one in Sacramento County. So in this pie chart, you're starting to see sales taxes overtake or catch up to fuel taxes. But today, more than half of our funding comes from the federal excise tax on fuel, as well as a variety of state excise taxes on fuel. And then differences from the last plan. So this is where I think it's really important to note the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. This is where all of our federal funding comes from. 6-year law. The last, this IIJA represented a really large increase from the FAST Act, from the prior authorization, but that large increase happened largely in the competitive programs, the federal programs, and then funds that might go to states by formula, but are competitive programs at the state. So when you look at SACOG's regional funding programs, the things that come to us like CMAQ and STBG, those did go up. They're increasing by about 2% a year through IIJA, but they didn't see the lion's share of increases. So the lion's share of increases are things that we as a region have to go after and compete for. And that might change the way you think about our investment strategy. How do we leverage kind of very limited regional dollars, fairly limited local dollars, because you don't have a lot of flexibility built into all your local dollars? How do we leverage what is there to go after these really big pots of federal dollars? And that is something that this transportation plan is really going to have to wrestle with, because it changes the way you think about investment strategy. And then who decides how funding is spent? So I mentioned, and you heard from the last presentations as well, there are always strings attached to revenues that come to the region for transportation. And so on the local side here, you'll see, local revenues make up better than 60%, or local programs make up better than 60% of the funding that we're planning for over the next 2.5 decades. But about 20% of those are coming from gas tax subventions that are going to locals, and those are, or sales tax that are going to locals. 1/4 cent of our statewide sales tax comes into the TDA program, and you see it in the form of LTF money or state transit assistance money that goes into either transit or maintaining your roads. So you don't have that money available to you to go build capital projects, right? So there's a lot of funding in here that kind of, it's already earmarked for various purposes, and then there's another section of it that is kind of discretionary, and then that's where this board will have more decision-making power over the kind of the overarching investment strategy of the plan. How much is going towards maintenance? How much is going towards transit? How much is going towards system expansion programs? There's a sliver of all of this that we'll dig into more starting in August, when we bring you more information on investments on the transportation projects, we'll start digging more into that. But another important point here is the SACOG's regional programs today make up between 6 and 7% of all of the funding that gets spent on transportation in the region. And I mentioned with that increase in competitive programs at the federal and state level, that number is declining over time. So by the time we're wrapped up with this plan, it doesn't seem like a lot, but it's about 5% of the share. It's a fairly meaningful reduction in kind of the share of funding in this region that is controlled at the regional level compared to the share of funding that we need to compete at a state or a federal level. And then another major, so that's the change kind of on the federal side with the latest authorization. Another important input into this is that Clean Cars Act 2. So the state's plans on increasing the adoption of electric vehicles or zero emission vehicles, and then in general, we're seeing fuel efficiency improve over time. So this chart here, and in the staff report, I linked to a LAO report about kind of the risks to California's transportation funding through the Clean Car Act 2, through this reduction in consumption of fuel and diesel over time. That is going to have impacts on things like the STIP. And the STIP is equates to roughly a third to up to a half sometimes of our regional funding program. LAO forecasts are looking at we could see up to 60% reductions in the STIP by 2035 over the next 10 years. And that is huge numbers, and that is really important for us to be paying attention to. And so what we're seeing is a declining in state revenues, declining in some of the funding that comes to us for making decisions. And one of your strategic plan priorities for the agency, as well as a policy priority out of the last plan, is we have to modernize the way that we pay for transportation in this state and in this region. And so I'll talk a little bit about options for future revenue here that are included in both your current plan and up for your discussion on this next plan. New sales taxes are in that $37 billion I talked about. There's a proposed new sales tax for Sacramento County that's been in our plan for quite some time. A new sales tax in Placer County. Those are kind of baked into that $37 billion right now. But we know that there's always much more appetite for funding than we have ability to pay for. And just to put that into some context, when we did the call for projects, so all of your local staff gave us all of the investments that they're looking for to be considered for this plan, we got about $14 billion in road and highway capacity projects, expansion projects. Your current plan includes just over $6 billion. So more than double the amount of appetite than what's in the existing plan. On the road maintenance side, I mentioned already, we run, even in the existing plan and with the new sales tax measures and with SB1, which increased gas taxes, we're still running around a $500 million a year shortfall for maintaining our roadway system. So finding ways to pay for all of that are hugely important and imperative that this board has put into both your strategic plan as well as your last plan. Two of those strategies, in addition to the sales taxes, are kind of express lanes and tolling. We've been talking a lot about that with CARTA lately, but also road usage charges or in our region, mileage-based fees. So this is the managed lane network from the last plan, or the tolled network from the last plan. And we're working with Caltrans District 3 right now to kind of figure out what the next plan should represent in terms of that managed lane network. And then on the mileage-based fees, right now, California is doing a kind of a pilot program around a road usage charge. What they are looking at is to, at some point, flip from a fuel-based system to a use-based system. So, and this is an important point that is kind of part of your direction from the last plan, that any of these mileage-based fees or road usage charges, they cannot be on top of gas taxes or exist alongside gas taxes. This is a replacement. And what the state is talking about is a revenue neutral replacement. So my numbers might be a little bit dated now, but roughly the equivalent cost per mile of the fuel taxes today for an average car, it's about 2 pennies per mile is what it costs to drive an average car today. Obviously, your fuel economy is going to bounce that all over the place, but roughly 2 cents a mile. So what the state wants to do is kind of maintain that and keep that going forward. But it's now a little bit more resistant to those reductions in fuel because it's based on usage. So as usage goes up, we'll see revenues go up. Right now, we're seeing the inverse. We're seeing driving increase, but at the same time, you see fuel consumption go down because the fleet's getting so much more efficient. So attaching that to how much you use the system brings that back up. But there are a lot of concerns about privacy, how you do this. Those are all things that still need to be worked out. And one of the things that the board wanted included in the last plan is, let's include this in the last plan, but that's really, we need to have a seat at the table. We need to investigate at the state table when they're investigating this. We need to investigate what the impacts would be to lower income households, what the impacts are in rural parts of the region, what the impacts are in the urban parts of the region. So those are all things that we still need to investigate. And we have a grant right now we're working on with Southern California, SCAG, and then San Diego Council of Governments, the SANDAG, to build up a pilot for what mileage-based pricing could look like at a regional level. So there's the state road usage charge that looks to stay revenue neutral. And then what your current plan and for consideration in this plan includes is once that is in place, then that opens up the opportunity for the region to turn that into a dynamic mileage-based user fee or mileage-based fee, where, say, for instance, during the morning commute on I-80, that is a heavily impacted road. So maybe it costs more than that 2 pennies per mile to drive at that time. But at the same time, out in Sutter County on a road, you're not having the same impact to the system. So does it make sense to kind of have that price be the same? So the mileage-based fees, the way we envision this in this region, can fluctuate by time of day, by location, and also, and this is what our grant does, can you wrap around a set of incentives around that? Can you wrap around where people might see disproportionate impacts, lower income households? Can you use some of this to offer some rebates and things like that, or encourage other alternative modes of travel? You don't have to drive, you can use this, and here's some incentives to do that. So there's a lot of questions here to still work out, but the important kind of take home is the question is that the state's gonna move this way. They're working on doing that. What is the regional kind of customization of that? How do we capture that and make sure that we can sustain ourselves and build and maintain our system here? Yeah.
See how good I am. How does the state feel they're going to deal with people who are coming from out of state when they don't have that in their state? And how does that work? I mean, do people still they don't buy gas now? They just get their gas free and they pay, or do they pay for gas and pay for miles? How does that transition?
You'll still end up paying for gasoline. But I don't know how you handle kind of the neighboring states coming in. I do know that some of our neighboring states, and there are, last time I checked, I think it was like 14 states, it might be more than that now, that are also looking into road usage charges as a way of getting away from the fuel tax. And so you could think of it, there might be a block of states that all do this together. But as far as, you're still going to have in commuting into the state, how do you capture that? I think that's still all to be worked out. I don't know the answer to how exactly they'll tackle it.
Well, they do, they already have toll roads where you can be on a trip. I get bills and I'm like, did I go through that? I don't remember going through that state. And oh yeah, that was like a month ago, that their computers pick it up and track you down, I guess.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
So kind of that's an overview of kind of just the revenue picture and kind of some of the dynamics we're looking at when we're developing the forecast for how much money we have in this plan. But then there is how are you going to make decisions about your investment strategy? How do you use that money? And so that comes down to a couple of factors. I mentioned the land use forecast that you would be considering action on in June. We try to make sure that land use forecast is married up to a really efficient multimodal transportation system. And then these revenue assumptions, I mentioned all of these things come with strings. And so our kind of our next steps in our analysis is to look through, how much money is already earmarked for transit capital and how much is earmarked for transit operations and maintenance. And then how much discretion do we have? We've got the sales taxes, there's the grants, there's things like that where we start to have an idea of, or start to get a better idea of where we can start to shift expenditures around in this plan. And this slide is it's a visual of how the expenditure priorities in your plans have shifted over time. The big shifts here you'll notice are between the pink and the blue, and you're seeing that is road maintenance in pink and kind of road capital, highway capital expansion projects in blue. And over time, you've seen that pink maintenance budget get larger. That's an indication of two things. It's both just kind of policy priority within the region that we want to make sure we're maintaining our existing system, but it's also a result of just a maturing region. You'll see in places like in Southern California, you might see maintenance expenditures be upwards of 70% of their total budget. Well, that's because they're so built out, most of their money is going into the existing system. We're still a very fast growing region, not as fast as we were in the early 2000s, but we're still among the fastest or the fastest in California. But as you mature and as you build out, more and more of your budget starts getting taken up by all that roadway capital and that transit capital that you built as you were going through that kind of fast growth. So this is a natural progression as well as a shift in kind of policy priority over time. And these are all things that when we come to you in August, we want to start talking to you about what is the appetite and what are the needs for investments across all of these things. What money do we have to pay for these? What's already bookmarked for each of these buckets? And what discretionary money do you have? And you have some decisions to make about where it goes and what projects it funds. That we want to start digging into a lot more detail in August. But I wanted to give you kind of an overview of what we're looking at in terms of revenue assumptions. I mentioned that 37 billion. It includes all of our existing sources. It includes a couple of new sales taxes. But when might the state switch over to a road usage charge is a big question. Whether we want to include kind of that regional component, that mileage-based component, those are all big questions. And of course, how much money we generate is going to be in direct correlation to kind of usage of the system, how much driving is happening out there. And so those are all numbers that could increase our budget, but those are things that are going to come a little bit later and worthy of some additional deliberation before we assume that those are going to be included in the plan. And so I started already talking about next steps. June is your land use action potentially, but you'll be talking a lot more about that in May. August, September, October is where we have the space to really have discussions about the transportation investment strategy that marries up to that land use. And then by November, what we're hoping for is that you would be entertaining action to adopt a land use and a transportation package with a revenue forecast. And that kind of is the foundation of the plan. And then that allows us moving into 2025 to start working on the environmental document, to start working on the implementation policies and the strategies. We'll be doing that in the late summer and in the fall, kind of in parallel with talking about investment priorities. But I mentioned earlier, we've got to have kind of strategies for how we're going to realize any new revenues. We also have to have kind of outline what are our strategies to make sure that the land use pattern that we have forecasted is realistic, and it is ambitious, but it's achievable. And things like Green Means Go are those types of strategies. So we need to have a discussion about what are the programs that the region is going to stand up to help make sure this plan can happen. And so that'll happen kind of in the early part of 2025 as we're working on the plan document itself, the environmental document. And then in the latter half of the year is when we really start getting into kind of more of the public review period, the draft DIR, the cleaning up of all of that for adoption by the end of the year. So very high level preview of the revenue forecast and kind of what's coming. You'll have a lot more opportunity starting in August to dig into all of this. But any questions or concerns or feedback that you have today will shape what we bring back to you in those later discussions this summer.
I just have a comment before my colleagues go. I find it, I was hoping today would really clear things up for me. It certainly hasn't. And I think the frustrating part, at least for me, is I just have to say and get off my chest. here we are as a region required to come up with a blueprint or MTPSCS. We have relatively little ability to how we spend the money that we do get because they're all connected, and it sounds like there's going to be more competitive, statewide competitive grants and money available. So we have that. And then when we talk about alternatives to the fuel tax, I think what a lot of people, like in my community, we rely heavily on fuel tax, sales tax generator. Well, it keeps going down as the price of fuel goes up. We are not receiving the same amount of sales tax. But I think as we're talking about that, we're talking about mileage base, yet we've been encouraging people and communities all over, developers and the like, to build in to their plans, different types of facilities that would help with ride sharing and cycling and walking to work and all these things that that won't fall into the area of road-based, usage, mileage usage. And so it seems like we're just kind of chasing our tail. By the time we get this figured out, or the state figures out what the plan is going to be for the state, and I need to mention the privacy issues and things like that, and what my insurance company gets to know about my personal life, all of that, we're going to now have communities where people, to reduce our GHG that the state again has mandated, we're going to have these communities where people don't drive or drive much, much less. So we're going to then come back again, meaning the state is going to come back again and say, well, now that the usage mileage isn't really working out, what's the next thing? And are they going to then claw back our ability to decide how that money is spent? So just a comment, I'm not looking for an answer, but it's just frustrating.
Yeah, I think what popped into my mind as you were saying that, even when we're looking out to 2050, and we've got a pretty ambitious plan in terms of what we are seeing in driving reduction, VMT reduction over time, but we're not looking at a region that's going to flip on its head and nobody drives in 2050. We're still looking at driving. We're going to be a driving region over the next 3 decades. So when we're talking about, how much transit use are we going to see, how much bike and ped use are we going to see, those are all going to increase. They might increase by hundreds of percents, but driving today is like 93% of trips. And even when we look into the future and mode shift, we're still looking at, 85 to 90% of trips, if not better. So driving is going to be around for quite some time. The other thing is with the road usage fee, if you did start to see a lot less driving, that also means you have a corresponding reduction in need. So you're not putting as much wear and tear on the roadways anymore, and you're not needing to build as many new roadways or new capacity if you're not seeing the demand for it anymore. And so I think there's 2 things that kind of are mitigating forces to your very, very good comment there. One is, I don't think driving is going anywhere soon. I think more likely you're going to see more electric vehicles and car shares and things like that coming. And we got to make sure they're participating and paying for the system that they're using. And at the same time, if you do see driving start to diminish in certain areas, it might just mean that there's a corresponding reduction in need for road or highway capacity, and maybe there's need in other investment areas. And so just 2 thoughts that popped in as you were walking through that.
And I guess my point is that, the state came up with a gas tax to help fund what we needed, and then turned around and said, well, we want to go to, 100% electric and by this time frame, which totally defeats the purpose of having a gas tax.
Right.
And so what's the next thing, I guess, is my point. And so
that's the road.
Understood. I mean, people will continue to drive and not use other modes of transportation, but it's just frustrating. And then here we are at SACOG wrestling with, the blueprint, and it's like, it's almost for naught, I guess. I know it's not, but it's yet just another thing that we have to comply with. Director Frost?
Yeah, I was frustrated about the SB1, which everyone was told that it was gonna be paying for the gas tax, and then within, I think, a year or two, the state reallocated 500 million to excise tax or reappropriated it in a different way, and which means it can be spent differently than what it was intended to be spent as. And so that's part of the reason why taxpayers and citizens struggle, because it's hard to understand what's happening. And they don't know if they're gonna get what they really expected they were gonna get. The question I have relates to, because I always rationalized in my mind that, you know, like a toll road is wonderful in a lot of ways, because if you're willing to pay, you get the convenience. And now you're talking about charging people just to travel. And I wonder, maybe that's legal. If you work for the corporation, you can charge people whatever dues you want to charge them. But I wonder if it's lawful or constitutional to charge people to travel. That's a question that I have. And I'm gonna go try, I'd love to have some more information on, I don't know if there's reading material that we can read about what the state is trying, having the conversation they're having, so that we can personally do some research on that.
Sure. Well, so one thing, maybe it's a good preview, is that because there's been so many questions about transportation, revenue, pricing, funding overall, we're going to do a lunch between your next month's committees. So Thursday, June 6th, between transportation and land use, we will have a lunch, and we will just allow you to both eat and talk mileage-based charges and everything else. Also, a little fun fact, great conversation starter at a party, believe me. Oregon was the first state with a gas tax, 1919, I believe. Oregon is the first out of the gate on actually implementing and testing a mileage-based user fee. So we could look, and certainly, give us your questions and we'll come back to you on constitutionality, but this is the way it's going. The way it's going is from taxing fuel to taxing travel, right? That is, so we'll see if we can get you some kind of right, Joanna, a legal opinion on this, but that's the way it's going. And then the question really is, and I think some of the frustration is legitimate. And honestly, for all the work the state is doing right now on a RUC, road usage charge, there isn't a lot of talk about it. So the revenues are declining. Some kind of analysis is going on at a state level, and I think we are frustrated because we'd like to have all the locals of you all and the regions actually be helping shape this, right? And that's part of our job here, is to try to understand it and shape it. So, great points. We'll come back to you, but I do believe that, the gas tax is on its way out despite SB1. And and it won't be on top of it, it'll be a replacement. So the gas tax will go away and there'll be a mileage-based fee. And then the question is what it looks like, how it works, how it's fair, all of these things. And the more that's just coming on from down high will be frustrating. The more that we can shape that up will be better. Oh, Thursday, June 6th? Thursday, June 6th?
Just before your next lunar.
I can't remember my June dates, but yes, Thursday, June 6th.
Well, when you need to know.
No.
Is that your birthday?
Yeah.
No.
No. Your first committee meeting and you're confusing people. All right.
Okay.
Thursday, June 6th, between Transportation and Land Use Committee.
Thank you for that, James. Director Hume.
Thank you, Chair. Speaking of being confusing, I want to I'm going to come back to this conversation, but I want to start at the beginning here because even though I'm new to this committee, I was around in the public space back when the original blueprint was brought forward. And at that time, it was brought forward as a visioning document that would inform the funding decisions within the MTP. And there was no such thing as an SCS at that point. In the staff report, it seems those two terms have now become interchangeable. Is that my interpretation? Has the language changed? Has the name of the document changed? Or is
Got it. It's the name of the document. So we've changed the name of the MTP, the MTP SCS. It's always been the 2020 MTP SCS. We changed the name to the 2025 blueprint. It is not the same visioning project that it was in 2004, but we went with that change because the blueprint was hitting 20 years old, kind of around the time we started this, as well as the original blueprint went out to a horizon year of 2050. And now we finally got to a long range plan that is also going out to a horizon year of 2050. Now, the two land use sets of assumptions for both of those things are vastly different, right? Because what we thought we would have built to in the original blueprint by 2050 just hasn't panned out. We haven't grown as much as we originally were thinking we would in the early 2000s. But it is simply a name change. So what we're talking about with the 2025 blueprint is the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy.
And so then clarify, if I can stay on this for just a little bit more, clarify for me how, when the original blueprint was adopted and brought forward, there was, I mean, it was like, whoa, this is not taking land use control. This is not a land use grab. This is simply something that's broad strokes so that we know where to put funding. If the two are now the same, does that whole visioning guiding document no longer exist?
No, it still exists, and so it will continue to exist. We will still do like blueprint reviews as on when we get requests from local agencies. The principles of the blueprint, all of that still exists. The MTP SCS, what we're calling the 2025 blueprint, is required to have the Sustainable Community Strategy, which is a land use plan.
Okay.
But within the SB 375 that kind of makes that requirement, it has language that says, and nothing in this document kind of preempts local control.
Okay.
Right. So you still have local control over land uses, but we do have to create a plan of what do we want our kind of prevailing land use pattern or mix of uses and things like that to be over the next 20 years at a regional level to achieve both the SB 375 greenhouse gas reductions, our 19% per capita target, as well as our board has adopted kind of a triple bottom line policy framework for this. So what are the land uses that we can plan for going forward, serve that with a really efficient transportation network, and meet all of those goals? But none of that is going to erode kind of the local land use decision authority.
Okay. So I know we have a briefing coming up.
We
so
have
we can dive
Yes,
into
and I
that.
got a preview that might be a question. You're not the only person with a question. So let me reemphasize this because I think it has created some confusion and we didn't mean to do that. The 2004 blueprint that the region adopted bottom-up voluntary vision still exists. If you're in that blueprint, which is if your land use, it's still there. You're in the blueprint. We are now doing what we've done every 4 years, which is the MTP SCS. It's a mouthful. We hate acronyms almost as much as you do. And so our communications team said we should brand this the blueprint. That has created some confusion. But neither the blueprint in 2004 or this plan takes any land use authority away from any of you. But just like every other MTP SCS since 2008 and 2012, we have to have a land use forecast. We have to have a land use plan. It's constrained. So I know the branding has been a little confusing to people, but if you're in the 2004 blueprint, that exists still.
Okay.
Does that help?
It impacts policy. It impacts urban boundaries.
The MTP SCS.
All of it. I mean, all of it impacts the money.
Well, hopefully it's a
impacts
meaningful
everything.
document,
So
right?
it- yeah,
We spent a lot of
very-
time on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it,
So it does take, I think it does impact control.
I am not trying to
I'm
say
not
it's
saying
not
it takes it
important, far
away,
from
but
it.
yeah, we better get
is.
with the program or we're not going to get the money.
And look, one of the things we're going to talk about in the next 12 months is how does this not feel like a top-down mandate, but it feels like it is our regional plan for the future of this region, right? So we're going to we're coming to you now, and we'll come to you again the next few months on all the constraints. You just heard from Clint the sunny news that you have less transportation funding than we had in the last plan, right? We are going to try to flip that around to say, what are the key priorities for your local communities and how do they show up in this plan? And how does that express a commitment that the region, the state, and the feds are going to fund your local priorities, city by city, by county, that meet regional goals that need state and federal funds? So that's a little bit of the work ahead. Clint, right there in that timeline, implementation, strategy discussions, we are going to try to flip this around so it is an expression of where we're going.
Thank you for that. In one of the slides, one of the pie charts, it was showing the funding and one of them was regional and I think it was about 6%, 9%, I
Yeah.
can't remember.
Yeah.
Who controls that funding?
This board.
This board, okay.
But all of our answers come with caveats. This board controls that funding, but that funding is made up of largely three sources: two federal sources, congestion mitigation and air quality, and surface transportation block grant money. Those both have eligibility criteria with them, and they can only pay for certain types of projects, though they are quite flexible. They can pay for transit, roads, bike ped, programs, all sorts of stuff. So that there's that, and then there's also the STIP funding. There's a regional implementation part of the STIP. Those three sources of funding make up that regional pot, which is roughly, you'll make decisions on it roughly every 2 years, and it kind of bounces between 100 to 200 million, depending on how far we program into the future.
Okay. And I'm glad you brought up STIP because that's my next question is you mentioned STIP program funding declining. Is that because the program itself is sunsetting or is it that the state is not prioritizing it anymore?
No, it is because that program is dependent on the excise tax, the SB1 excise tax from fuel.
Okay.
And we are forecasting a decline in excise tax receipts.
All right, which then brings me to the last thing I'll talk about, which is kind of the meat of the issue that we're being asked, and that is the funding stuff. And so I am more of a spending guy than a revenue guy. Like, I think if you look at what's going out the door, you don't need to always look at what's coming in the door. So that's my kind of overall caveat. But what I will say is this is, one, I think we're going to have to look at another local measure. I think that is one of the most egalitarian revenue sources we can have because how much you buy determines how much you pay, and then that can be allocated. And I will say, and I'm sorry that Supervisor Frost just left, because I don't think that the other one, the vehicle miles traveled tax or road use tax, is a taxation on travel. It's a taxation on using a publicly maintained facility. And you're able to travel by foot, by car, by train, by bicycle without having to pay that tax. And so the problem is, it's kind of a, in my estimation, it's a perfect storm where state and federal partners have not addressed the actual amount of the tax. I don't know if it's still the same, but for the federal level, it was since 1996.
Yeah.
So the buying power per gallon has vastly diminished. Then fuel efficiencies of the cars have increased. And so what someone is paying into, so that way when someone looks down at me for driving an F-150, I kind of look back and I'm like, hey, I'm paying for your roads, Mr. Tesla. What are you looking down at me for? But so you've got that issue. And then you have the third issue, which is what I just raised, which is as we electrify, they're all using the same facility and not paying into it. And so how do we sort of true that up? I think the easiest way is going to be via DMV registration. You'll just have, this is brand new cars, 0 miles. This year I drove 10,000. That's now I've put the tax me on that. And how we verify that is one thing. But if we go to this dynamic pricing, I think that's where you're going to get into privacy issues, because I don't want you to know that I'm on 80 at 5 p.m. every day or whatever. That now you're starting to get into my personal habits, A, and B, I'm sitting in traffic and I'm paying extra for the privilege of doing this because you guys haven't built roads or whatever.
And Director Hume, one of the, we gave you a lot today and you're giving us a lot in return. One of the interesting things about the study is that we're actually in partnership with us and Southern California and San Diego is, what if you could provide people options? So one option is it's flat, it's based on mileage. One, the other is, hey, I don't think I actually travel as much. I'd like to opt into a program that actually, we're all tracked, right? It actually does track my miles and when I travel. Because I think actually I don't do as much traveling as the next person. So we as actual regions are trying to come up with creative ways that are sort of opt-in ways and incentive-based so that we can influence whatever the state is doing. You'll hear more about that.
Good.
I know that Director Teeter, I think, wanted to make a comment or a vice chair.
So the last thing I'll say is, as one who drives rural unincorporated county roads, I should be being paid on a per mile basis based on the maintenance that I have to do to my car. So, right? Yeah, Pamela knows what I'm talking about. Thank you.
Director Teeter? Okay.
What is the estimation for when they're doing this switch? Is it going to be by 2030, or because the fear is that the electric vehicles are hurting the roads more than helping. All right, so we would need more money to fix them, but we're having less come in for the tax. So when are they deciding, is this gonna be a rush thing where we're gonna do like a Band-Aid solution? Or is there gonna be a large thing where they're gonna be like, oh, we're gonna have a couple years overlay of it to slowly transition, but you're saying they're just gonna do a flop. So until then, we're just gonna have all that money run out and the roads are gonna need more work. So I'm just wondering when they're planning on doing this, are they gonna say like, hey, by 2029, we're gonna have something done, or is that just completely in the air?
So I don't believe there is and it's a question we have to wrestle with for this plan. I don't know that there is a deadline that the state has in mind. Hey, we've got to make this switch for now. The current plan in absence of that date, a commitment to a date from the state as they're continuing to study. The current plan said that we need, and that was a 2020 plan, is that we needed to see a transition within 10 years. So by 2030 to kind of stave off the worst of kind of, as you're talking about, the continued deterioration of our roadways at the same time that funding is go away, because that just adds to the price tag that we have to make up for when we eventually do make that switch. So the state, I don't believe currently has a time certain. They're still kind of investigating. Current plan called for it by 2030. I think it's a good topic for discussion is it reasonable to assume that they will have this in place by 2035? By 2050, when we're adopting the plan? I think it's reasonable at some point, but I think there's a lot to maybe research and discussion still left in that.
Well, thank you, Clint, for the presentation. Appreciate it. Any other questions? Okay, I think that takes us to the.
Well, and
Oh.
just for the record, there's no public comment on this item.
Thank you for the standing reminder. I appreciate it. Pamela, did you have something?
No.
Okay. All right. That takes us to the end, and if there's no other business, we'll adjourn.